The CRISPR-Cas9 system is a tool for cutting DNA at a specifically targeted location. The technique has already revolutionized gene editing, but scientists are always looking for new possibilities. So what else can CRISPR do? Since being discovered in a bacterial immune system, CRISPR-Cas9 has been adapted into a powerful tool for genomic research. There are two components to the system: a DNA cutting protein called Cas9 and an RNA molecule known as the guide RNA. Bound together, they form a complex that can identify and cut specific sections of DNA. First, Cas9 has to locate and bind to a common sequence in the genome called a PAM. Once the PAM is bound, the guide RNA unwinds part of the double helix. The RNA strand is designed to match and bind a particular sequence in the DNA. Once it's found the correct sequence, Cas9 can cut the DNA. Its two nuclease domains each make a nick, leading to a double-strand break. Although the cell will try to repair this break, the fixing process is error-prone and often inadvertently introduces mutations that disable the gene. This makes CRISPR a great tool for knocking out specific genes. But making double-strand breaks isn't all CRISPR can do. Some researchers are deactivating one or both of Cas9's cutting domains and fusing new enzymes onto the protein. Cas9 can then be used to transport those enzymes to a specific DNA sequence. In one example, Cas9 is fused to an enzyme, a deaminase, which mutates specific DNA bases, eventually replacing cytidine with thymidine. This kind of precise gene editing means you could turn a disease-causing mutation into a healthy version of the gene, or introduce a stop codon at a specific place. But it's not all about gene editing. Several labs have been working on ways to use CRISPR to promote gene transcription. They do this by deactivating Cas9 completely, so it can no longer cut DNA. Instead, transcriptional activators are added to the Cas9 by either fusing them directly or via a string of peptides. Alternatively, the activators can be recruited to the guide RNA instead. These activators recruit the cell's transcription machinery, bringing RNA polymerase and other factors to the target, and increasing transcription of that gene. The same principle applies to gene silencing. A CRAB domain fused to the Cas9 inactivates transcription by recruiting more factors that physically block the gene. A more outside-the-box idea for using CRISPR is to attach fluorescent proteins to the complex, so you can see where particular DNA sequences are found in the cell. This could be useful for things like visualizing the 3D architecture of the genome, or to paint an entire chromosome and follow its position in the nucleus. CRISPR has already changed the face of research, but these new ideas show that what's been achieved so far could just be the tip of the iceberg when it comes to CRISPR's potential.
The key question that we have to answer about the future of AI has nothing to do with the thing that I'm calling intelligence, and everything to do with the goals. We need to figure out who gets to decide what the super intelligent minds of the future want.
I'm Jeremy Hilton. I'm the Vice President of Processor Development at D-Wave Systems. I'm responsible for the Processor Development Group, which involves the design, test, and development and release of the quantum processor that D-Wave makes, which is the underpinning of the quantum computers that we build. Each of these black systems is a quantum computer. Inside that system is a thumbnail-sized quantum processor. In order to operate and develop quantum processors, we require a fairly extreme operating environment, which includes ultra-low temperatures and an ultra-low magnetic environment. And to achieve those, we need a fairly large and sophisticated system. The main room behind us houses the quantum processor, and the data racks in the front hold the quantum server where users can access and program the quantum processor. And the other data racks include the cooling system, which includes pumps and is responsible for the chirping sound you can hear in the background. Inside the room, before we get to the quantum processor, there are many layers of shielding which allow us to create the low noise magnetic environment the chip sits in.
We didn't understand what quantum computers were, and I'm not sure I understand it now, but he was getting 10 million bucks a machine and selling them to some of the most important organizations in the world, like NASA, like the CIA, like Mr. Bezos.
In this rack is the quantum server, which allows users from anywhere in the world to interact with the processor itself. This server is receiving information from users, converting that into the machine language of the processor, and sending that machine language into the room behind, where high-precision analog electronics will convert those signals into electrical pulses, which are sent through cables into the refrigerator and down through the cooling system to the ultra-low temperature of the processor. It executes its problem, and then data from the processor is returned to the server and returned to the user. And the system is very flexible, and that users can be programming in whatever language they're comfortable with, and interacting with it either with this system in their data center or even here in D.
This is a really tough topic. Last time I was here, 6 years ago, I framed what I wanted to say by giving a bunch of predictions about the future. I'm not going to do that this time. What I'm going to do is, instead of predict the future, what I'm going to try to do is explain a viewpoint.
The fridge itself has a combination of radiation shields as well as magnetic shields, which help support the ultra-low temperature operating environment and achieve the ultra-low magnetic field. Inside the room, we have to keep electromagnetic noise very low. So even things like power outlets aren't allowed, because power can be quite noisy without extensive filtering.
And the viewpoint is shared by a lot of people who are working in call it the frontiers of AI nowadays. But to get to AI and the frontier of how we think about minds, I want to roll way back.
So inside the room, we have the cooling system, and these are radiation shields. So this is the next layer of shielding inside the room. The chip itself, the quantum processor, is sitting at the bottom of this array of shields. And this is, again, the first of several more layers. Inside these shields is vacuum, which is the insulation of the cooling system. When we want to swap the processor or conduct maintenance on the fridge, we warm the system up, we remove these shields, and then the processor is accessible, as well as all of the internals of the refrigerator.
Throughout the history of our species, from the beginnings to now, has played an important role in trying to understand things, call it a theory of everything. Now science, and Avery's going to be talking about this picture I think a little bit later, science is a different way, maybe complementary, to explain nature. And as a physicist, I was always under the impression that if we really wanted to understand the way things are, what we did is we did a reductionist approach.
I'm the Director of Professional Services at D-Wave. I talk with our customers and partners about what quantum computers are, what kind of problems that they solve, and work with them to develop software that uses quantum computers.
Where we took everything there was and asked the question, what causes all of this at the most fundamental level?
A traditional supercomputer may have many thousands of processors in it, but in this quantum computer, there's only one chip located right down here. When you send an instruction to the quantum computer, a delicate quantum calculation is taking place on that chip to produce your solutions. The system we're looking at here is an ultra-low temperature cryogenic fridge. Because it works at such low temperature, we use the Kelvin scale to measure how cold it's getting. There's two levels of cooling in this system. The top one is a pulse tube refrigerator, which takes us from 300 Kelvin to 50 Kelvin, and then down to 3 Kelvin. This is roughly the temperature of interstellar space. And then a second refrigerator, a dilution refrigerator, takes us in this plate from 0.7 Kelvin, 0.1 Kelvin, and then down to 0.01 Kelvin.
was the only guy in the world, he and his company D-Wave, the only guy in the world making quantum computers.
The tantalizing promise of quantum computers is that they can do certain tasks exponentially faster than classical machines. And the quantum supremacy experiment is proof that this is indeed the case.
The word quantum computer is a little bit misleading because it sounds like a computer. And when people think of computer, they think of a phone or a laptop. The truth is the phone and the laptop and even a very powerful supercomputer all operate according to the same fundamental rules. And a quantum computer is fundamentally different.
The classical bit stores information as a 0 or 1, and a quantum bit can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. If you have 2 quantum bits, then there are 4 possible states that you can put in superposition. With 3 qubits, it's 8, 4 qubits, it's 16. It grows exponentially.
The nice thing about quantum supremacy is that it is a very well-defined engineering milestone.
In a nutshell, what we're trying to do is we're trying to show that experimental quantum computers can surpass the best supercomputers in the world.
To actually demonstrate quantum supremacy, we have these 3 steps. First, pick a circuit. Second, run it on the quantum computer. Third, simulate what the quantum computer is doing on a classical computer. We gradually increase the complexity of that circuit. At some point, it becomes completely impossible for the classical computer to keep up. Then we say we've achieved quantum supremacy.
Now, I don't believe that anymore. And what I want to do is share a different perspective on this problem. It's not that the physicist's approach is wrong, and actually I don't think that the religious approach is wrong either. I think there are different ways to frame the same problem.
We started building together the quantum chips to do this experiment. And then the evolution of the devices with more and more qubits and more complexity. It's very much an iterative process.
A lot of the work that we put in was not just these chips, but is also the infrastructure that you need to drive those chips.
When the system is operating, this plate and everything mounted below it is 10,000ths of a degree above absolute zero, which is more than 100 times colder than interstellar space mounted here. And this whole system is designed to sustain those low temperatures in a continuous cycle.
The cryostats that we install them in, all of the control electronics, software, all of this stuff is needed, and it all has to be developed.
So there wasn't like a, oh, we did it. I think we crossed it, and then it wasn't clear that we crossed it, so we crossed it a little bit further.
It took me like a day to realize, like, hold on, this is actually experimental data. It's kind of amazing to see, how well the theory works.
The processor that achieved quantum supremacy is called the Sycamore processor.
And it's parallel processing 2 to the 53 states, which is 10 million billion. And thus that enormous amount of parallel processing is what gives it the power.
An important aspect of the superconductivity is that these signals and the quantum processor unit consume virtually no power, whereas the supporting systems around it consume about 15.5 kilowatts. And this remains the same regardless of which processors are installed at the bottom. If you were to take a fully populated server rack out of a traditional supercomputer, it might consume 10 times that much power. So for our first customer, Lockheed Martin, when they upgraded from their first chip to the D-Wave 2, they saw a relative performance improvement on the order of 10,000 times, but the power consumption for the system was the same.
When we run small chunks of the computation in the largest supercomputer in the world, our estimate is that it will take thousands of years to complete the full computation.
The big technical achievement of quantum supremacy was really dependent on all this young talent who's kind of taken this and gotten it to work at a very technologically capable level.
We have reached a new computational capability. There are certain computations, the only place in the world where you can compute those things is here in our data center at Google Santa Barbara.
For the first time, we're showing that we can solve a problem that is just infeasible to do on the biggest computers ever made by civilization.
And what's exciting is now we're ready to turn this over to the world and say, let's figure out what we can do with this.
The thing that excites me most is building a useful quantum computer. When we can give a researcher a tool that is unlike any other and say, great, figure out something cool to do with it. Mankind is pretty good at that.
If you garner nothing more than that, that's what you need to know. It's microwave radiation warfare, is what this is.
In the future, when we can design mines, an important thing to understand is that designed mines can have any goals we want. In this wonderful story by Greg Eden called Permutation City, which I highly recommend that you read, the post-humans, some of them, explicitly go through this.